So, in the year of our Lord 2023, on the 9th of September, I cried into a microphone for 7 minutes straight about how I think Elo systems are the worst thing to ever happen to Counter-Strike. It was released while the game was still in beta and plateaued around 15,000 views, which was incredible. I never thought I was going to get even 1,000 views, so I was very grateful. And then the beta ended, 30 million people played Counter-Strike, and my video shot up to 80,000 views, where it sits a little bit above that today. With the end of the beta came the proper introduction of a huge player base and a huge rating system based on Glicko 2, resulting in me getting a 5.6k rating, Kenny S receiving a 6.7k rating, and NBK receiving a 1.5k rating, which just proves that this is a robust system that works perfectly. The original video from last year gets my base point across pretty well, but I've always wanted to expand upon it in a slightly more long-form manner, and I guess that's what I'm doing here. So, the base problem. In Hungary in 1903, Satan himself was born in a burning orphanage and took on the name Arpad Emmerich Elo with the straightforward purpose of ruining my matchmaking experience over 100 years in the future. To do so, he spent many decades playing the worst game ever invented: chess, and eventually deciding to enact his satanic plan of inventing his Elo rating system, which used silly math equations and relative Elo of two players to calculate how much a player would gain or lose in Elo points after a given game. Silly. This system worked excellently for chess, but Arpad saw past the simple use of his rating system, Elo, and made his system specifically only care about wins and losses, so that in 5v5 competitive shooters in the 2010s, his system could be used and be entirely inefficient. Thankfully, Arpad Elo had a heart attack and died in 1992, long before he could see his master plan come to work. Later, however, Satan sent one of his other disciples, Mark Glickman, a worshipper of Arpad Satan Elo, who created the Glicko rating system to take into account volatility and reliability of a specific player's rating. However, this too was based on wins and losses, and as such was slammed into every single FPS of all time, finishing Elo's work and dooming all of humanity to Elo Hell forever.
Let's show how bad systems that work entirely off of win-loss actually are.
Let's imagine we're dealing with a player on this scale of Elo, from 100 to 1600. Oversimplification alarm! Wee-oo! Yeah, we're gonna be oversimplifying some stuff right here for illustrative purposes. So every single game, if this player wins, he gains 50 Elo, and every time they lose exactly 50 Elo, because we're pretending that this is some sort of matchmaking where they're always placed against a perfectly matched opponent by rating. So let's look at a span of 40 games, and let's imagine we're dealing with 20 wins and 20 losses starting out at 800 Elo, right in the middle. One of the excellent things about maths and graphs like this is that because we have an equal number of wins and losses, no matter what, we're always going to end up back at 800, which all three players I've drawn here actually should do, because we are currently pretending that this is chess and it's 1v1. They're not winning any more than they're losing, and since their ability to win or lose a game is entirely driven by their personal skill, then if they have a win rate of exactly 50%, then they are ranked semi-appropriately. What's interesting is that no matter what combination of 20 wins and 20 losses we get, he will always end up at 800 Elo by the end, which means this system ranks that player who shot way above and hit 1300 and dropped back down the exact same as the player who shot down to 400 and climbed back up. Except just about everyone can get these lucky streaks of wins and losses if we're talking about 5v5. But of course, that's just because we're stopping at 40 and taking two measuring points. If you measure at 26, the peak of both players' Elo, there's a difference of 900 points between them. Anyway, the problem with the system that only cares about win rate is that this is what you get for 20 wins and 20 losses. You will always return to 800 no matter what. But that's fine, isn't it? Well, not if we're talking about a team-based game, because there you are part of a larger whole, and you need to work with your team and succeed together in order for the team to win. Anyone who's ever done a group project in school can tell you other people are cunts, and getting work done is more stressful than working in an innocent orphanage in Gaza. So at this point, we have a variance in performance. Winning and losing the game is no longer a reflection of your skill, because we're talking about 5v5. It is instead a reflection of the aggregate team skill together with their collective ability to work together. So this player, for instance, with 20 wins and 20 losses, could very likely be playing above the level of the average 800 Elo player, but still have this exact same journey where they end up back at 800. Let's instead imagine a system that can actually take into account these three players as real different players. Let's say the player on top plays half his games as the top fragger and has his Elo adjusted accordingly, and the bottom player plays half his games as the bottom fragger, so that on average, one player is always clearly better than the other, but only slightly. One on average is the second bottom player, whilst one on average is the second second top player. So here's how that works out. A system that takes into account personal performance to modify the result of an Elo system, as we can clearly see, will rank a player up and down depending on how well they perform, together with their wins and losses. Here, I've simplified the modification. I'll get more into how I would want this to work later on after we've looked at some simulations, but for now, let's just say that if you're the top fragger, you get 1.5 times the normal Elo you'd receive, so in this case it goes from 50 to 75 Elo, and if you're the bottom fragger, you get 0.5 times the normal Elo you'd receive, so 50 here goes to 25. The inverse is also true if you top frag on a loss, so a top fragger on a loss would go from 50 to 25, and a bottom fragger on a loss would go from 50 to 75, because you're losing that amount of Elo. With this, assuming that half the time the green player is top fragging and half the time the red player is bottom fragging, with the other half being average, we can see a huge difference. Green man goes up to 1625 before settling at 1325. Meanwhile, the garbage shit poop player dropped down as low as 25 Elo, eventually setting on 275. Neither of them ended up back at 800. The difference between these two graphs is that we have a player who is, on average, the second worst player in the team, and we have another player who is, on average, the second best player in the team. I've exaggerated the numbers to make things more obvious for illustrative purposes, but this is what I see as being the benefit of a potential system that, while still calculating Elo and using win and loss to give or take Elo points, takes into account a personal performance. But I can't just say that and leave, right? I can't just propose my improvement without proving first that a system that only cares about win rate doesn't accurately reflect a player's skill in a team-based game. At this point in the script, I had everything I just said worked out. I had everything ready, and it was mid-September 2023. The following 8 months was figuring out how exactly to prove my position, right or wrong.
My first thought was an Excel spreadsheet, and if you want to find out how that went, you can go down into the description and subscribe to my Patreon for the extended cut of this video. It's a little over an hour long and contains a lot more details about my process early on with the Excel spreadsheets that I ultimately cut from here because it took too long. In the end, my Excel spreadsheet divided 100 players, each with a unique skill, into 6 distinct groups. Each group was then taken through a round of matchmaking where 10 random players from each group were put into a game, 5 players either side. Each team's average skill was then calculated with the higher average skill going up a rank and the lower skill going down a rank. By the end, I'd been given a data set that, let's just say, spurred me on further. It was clear from the limitations of the spreadsheet that I needed something more complex and at a bigger scale, so I started with 4 simple goals for an improved simulation that I intended to run in Python. Any programmers out there, please halt your laughter until the rest of the audience have caught up with what I did wrong. At the start of this project, I didn't really know programming, so I ultimately had to learn how to code. I ended up getting a bundle on Zenva Python courses and decided to give it a go, and unfortunately for everyone, it's better than the free options of Code Academy or Free Code Camp. Oh well. Having an actual human being whose job is to educate you actually explain what's going on as you go through the course is a massive help when trying to learn. And in the end, after a little over 20 hours of learning, I felt ready to go ahead with my project.
So there I began, slowly building up the program piece by piece. I started with a list of players, and then I changed it to a tree list to store additional data about the players. I added buttons to wipe the database to clean it up, have the names to set up the 2 have names I'd randomly slam together to create unique players. I then rewrote the half name generator thing, and then I made the system actually calculate winners and change their rating based on Elo, and then I used Glico2 from good old Huang Sub Lee and modified it slightly so it'd fit in my existing system. I contacted my friend who works professionally, and he basically told me that my server setup was a nightmare, which made me cry. And then I spent 10 days running 1 million games with a pool of 150,000 players, and I created a CSV with the data on it that was 96 gigabytes big, which is too big for anything to deal with, which means I wanted to make the system faster, which took a long time and ultimately didn't work properly. Getting Elo to work was pretty easy, but Glico2 was significantly harder. See, Elo just works off of a relatively simple equation comparing the Elo of 2 teams and using their difference to calculate how much Elo is gained or lost. Glico2, meanwhile, is horrible. Thankfully, I won't be doing Glico2 here, because it turns out the main benefit is handling breaks between play, which, when we're dealing with robots who play the exact same number every time, kinda hard to justify using. The most difficult part of making this work, though, is multi-threading, and now all of the developers who have written in Python are currently laughing in my face. Because, you see, at this point I have the program up and running, reasonably optimized, with only one write call to the database at the end of each game. But whenever I try multi-threading, it goes, "Oh my god, what the hell is going on?" It looks like it's working, but it's not going up correctly, and frankly, it isn't all that fast either. Unfortunately, none of my friends know either, but ChatGPT knows. See, it turns out Python is a stinky liar, and multi-threading isn't actually multi-threading, and multiprocessing can't work the way I want it to, at least not without completely rewriting my code. At this point, I gotta be honest, the project stood still. For 2 weeks, I didn't touch it, because the 2 weeks before it, I'd been trying for days to get multiprocessing or multi-threading to work, and I ended up with a version of my software that runs even slower than it did before. I'm not a programmer. My friends don't really know Python, and I couldn't get anyone to help me. This was a rough time because I realized it could only mean one thing. Python is, by its very nature, pretty slow. It's not meant for simulations like this. So I came to a simple conclusion. I had to learn a different language like Java or C. But at some point during this project, it became my thesis for a little exam I'd been doing for myself. It felt like failure giving up and swapping to a different language. Like, yeah, sure it works, but if I was to run another 1 million games on how slow it is now, it'd take 13 days. Like, yeah, I could, but it turns out 1 million games isn't even enough for 150,000 players. The player base size I'd settled on after looking at the active player base of FaceIT. For nearly a month, the project got shelved. Fun fact, during this project, I've had 2 surgeries. The first surgery was on my knee on December 20th, and I had a second surgery on my shoulder on April 10th. Effectively, the shoulder surgery immobilized my right shoulder for 6 weeks in a sling, which prevented me from properly working on this project. Except obviously, because I'm a dickhead. After 2 weeks, I was already back in my computer working on the project. I had pains in my shoulder so bad, I'd have to take a double dose of pain meds some days just to manage to sleep. And even after 8 weeks, I was still taking them. Thankfully, I'm off them now. I couldn't give up now. It felt crushing. I didn't want to swap to another language, and I didn't want to spend another 6 weeks waiting for the simulations to complete. So, I didn't give up. I pawned it off on someone else. At this point, I'd like to thank Sift personally. Without them, this project lies dead on a riverbank in the Midwest small town with a rugged cop hoping to solve the mystery that turns out to be the one that gets away from him and haunts him for the rest of his life. Sift was kind enough to offer to literally rewrite all my code in Java, which was a significantly faster language, and oh boy was it faster. My version ran a pool of 150,000 players doing 1 million games over 11 days. It would have taken 7, but as I went on it slowed down significantly to the point of doing 1 second per game. Sift's version, however, did not slow down and was quicker to begin with. So quick in fact that 150,000 players playing 15 million games took slightly more than 3 hours. Jesus Christ. Except there was a big problem. On May 28th, 2024, I got scooped by FaceIT. They updated their Elo formula to include in-game performance. I had 2 reactions to this that came at the same time. I was right all along! I knew it! It looks like they're doing exactly what I suggested. They're even specifically saying that the current system doesn't perfectly reflect skill. Oh my god! I was right! Yes!
Oh no. The video.
See, I was not ready to give up months of work, so instead, I'm going to shift my sights. I'm now aiming them squarely at Valve. See, I'm now going to send an email to FaceIT to see if they'd be willing to share the data of how this update changes the effects of the ranks after a couple of months. We'll see if they'd be willing to share that data with me, how it affects baiting, smokes thrown, number of saves in a game, etc. Again, there's 2 major problems with a system like this. How do we count in-game performance, and how do we prevent that count from incentivizing bad team play? I want to see what FaceIT's solution is. And Valve, your only competitor in Counter-Strike's matchmaking just made this change, and frankly, having looked at it a couple weeks afterwards, it's going over kinda good. If you want to make people take matchmaking seriously, which by the way, they still don't actually do that, you need to have a better system than FaceIT. So, about those 15 million games that Sift simulated for me. Let's see, am I a moron? Is Valve correct? Is win-based matchmaking sufficient for ranking how good a player is in a 5v5 competitive game? So, one final time, let's lay out the process. First, we generate 150,000 players. These players have a randomly generated ID and name, as well as a skill. This number starts at 0.01 for the first player generated, and then goes up by 0.01 for each subsequent player, all the way up to the max number, which at 150,000 players is 1500 skill. Each player is then given a default rating of 1,000, which, based on a handful of tests, seemed like the best choice. Then, a final column is added to the player, history, and their starting elo of 1,000 is placed in it. Let's look at a round of play a little further into the simulation. As matchmaking begins, one player is plucked from the database at random, and their rating is recorded. Then, the system shortens the list of players available from those within 100 rating points of the chosen player. and then picks another 9 players at random. These players are then sorted from top to bottom in rating. Odd numbers are placed into Team A, and evens are placed into Team B. We then calculate which team wins from their average skill and send them to the Elo calculator, where their Elo is changed to the new amount, and their new Elo is added to their history. This is repeated 15 million times, each player playing exactly 1,000 times, resulting in this. Okay, whoops, I've done a mic change. Sorry about that. This list is quite large, so let me talk about some specifics from this whole thing. My GUI looks like this, but I'm going to clean it up so it looks more easily digestible, and replace the random numbers in the names of players with a randomly chosen name of some people I know. Let's start at the bottom. The lowest rated player in this Elo system is Vondas, with a 473 rating. We saved the Elo history of each player, which allows us to see not only how many points the players received for each game, but to use that to draw a graph of any specific player's journey through their 1,000 games, Elo-wise. What's interesting is Vondas here doesn't actually have that low of a skill. At 13.3, he's only the 1,313th worst player in the game. This means, quite simply, that he's 1,312 ranks away from where he's supposed to be. We are going to be using this difference as our new delta, the number of ranks a player is away from their objective rank, i.e. their skill ranking. This new number is going to serve as a sort of individual delta. The higher that deviation is, the worse it gets. Now, by all accounts, playing 1,000 games and being 1,312 ranks away from your true rank is quite bad. That represents 34 days, a month and 3 days of continually playing Counter-Strike. No sleep, no food, no breaks, and no queue times. 1,000 games is a lot of time and a lot of Counter-Strike. Most people playing the game probably won't ever have 1,000 games under their belt, at least not for at least 1,000 plus hours of playtime. But in the grand scheme of things, 150,000 players and being 1,312 ranks away from where you're supposed to be isn't all that bad. I mean, come to think of it, it's only a 0.8% difference. Of course, 0.8% sounds a lot smaller, doesn't it? It allows you to accept 1,300 cunts who are worse than you are somehow ranked higher because of a system that doesn't accept your personal performance. Well, Vondas here is actually quite lucky. 1,300 is nowhere near as bad as it can get. Looking just above him, we can find Sawyer. Sawyer here has a rating of 545, making him 12th from the bottom in the entire pool, with a 33% win rate. You can see by his Elo graph that he went the old up and down I described in my simplified explanation at the start, but shot down in the last 70 or so games. This poor son of a bitch has a pretty high skill, all things considered, at 101.38, meaning his skill deviation is just about 10,000. Imagine playing 1,000 games of Counter-Strike and still ending up 10,000 ranks away from where you're meant to be. It's not all doom and gloom, though. The system is sometimes able to rank someone semi-appropriately. Slightly further down from Sawyer, we can find this guy, Cola Guy 2001. Once again, on the Elo graph, we can see that same up and down behavior. This guy has a 32% win rate, and at a skill of 1.0, is actually only 93 ranks away from where he's supposed to be. That's well within any potential margin of error. Cola Guy here does appear to have been ranked fairly appropriately. Okay, so down at the bottom, we have some outrageous placements and some pretty accurate placements, right? Well, we'll talk about that in a bit. Jumping to the highest rated player, Backpack Brain. This guy shot up in his last 100 or so games and actually ended up only 2,000 ranks away from where he's meant to be. That's well below Sawyer from earlier. A lot of players who are meant to be ranked highly have in fact shot upwards similar to Backpack Brain. Look at Square G here, for instance, 215 ranks away. That's essentially nothing. The worst I could find at the very top here was Mad, who ended up with an 80% win rate. He was just over 3,200 ranks above where he was meant to be, which is still considerably less than Sawyer from before. But looking at this list, at the very top here, where's the best player? There's only one player with a skill of 1,500, and it's Colombian Vondas. Where is he? He should be somewhere near the top, at least. Let's scroll down the list a bit, see if we can find him. Oh my fucking god, what the fuck? I've been lying to you. Deceptively, I've shown you the low end of how bad this gets, because at the extremes, the top and bottom 100 or so, it's gonna be the best, because those people will be the furthest away from where the rest are. They have the most people in the pool that they're better than or worse than. This is why I told you to ignore average and median. The two extremes will balance out and make it look reasonable. Since deviation is our new delta, let's plot the deviation of every single player on a graph. The highest we've seen so far before Colombian Vondas is about 11,000, so let's make it plot vertically to 20,000. What does that look like? Whew! Yeah, turns out the best player in the world got quite unlucky, didn't it? Ended up over 45,000 ranks away from where he was supposed to be. The average deviation is 20,000, meaning that on average, the margin of error for a single rank is 20,000 players. Out of 150,000, that's 13.3%. Or, if we scale it up to Counter-Strike's 30 million monthly players, the margin of error is 4 million players. The margin of error that Valve have apparently deemed acceptable in an isolated perfect scenario with a fixed skill and no random variables is 4 million players. For reference, 4 million is the population of Croatia. 4 million is enough to fill the 50 biggest football stadiums in America all at once. 4 million players is a ridiculous amount, and keep in mind that's if everyone plays the same number of games, always plays exactly the same, there's never any cheaters, smurfers, interruptions, distractions, and nobody ever crashes or disconnects, and that everyone plays every map identically. If 4 million ranks is the average distance between any given player and their true rank in a perfect scenario, what the fuck could it look like in the real world? So if 11,000 isn't as bad as it gets, how bad does it get? All we need to do to find that out is look at the middle. Here's Foreign Gamer, whose rank deviation, RD, is 54,346. That's insanely high, even given the Colombian Vondas. Here's Georgie, whose RD is 60,247. But the highest I can find, is at Joven at 83,085. That's 4 times the average. No. Could it be Dread 1? He's sitting at 93,286. At this point, this poor sod is 62% of the matchmaking pool away from his real rank. Surely, it can't go any higher. No, in fact, it goes way higher. It isn't even Blastic with a rank deviation of 103,110. No. The biggest rank deviation I could find was Kilroy. Kilroy had a ranking deviation of 120,695. That's 80% of the player base. If Kilroy was ranked this incorrectly in matchmaking, he would be ranked a staggering 24,139,000 players away from his true rank. Fuck filling the 50 biggest football stadiums in America. With that number, we're beginning to rival the entire population of Sweden and Greece and Mongolia being between this poor motherfucker and his actual rank. I'm actually staggeringly spoiled for choice in players over 100,000 ranks away from where they're supposed to be. There's 39 players, almost 40 players who are ranked over 100,000 ranks away. Meanwhile, there are only 30 players who are 5 or less ranks away from where they're supposed to be. There are more players who are 5 times or above the average rank deviation away from their objective rank than there are players that are very accurately ranked. If you want to double check our data here, the GitHub link to Sift's Java code is in the description, and you can download it all they want. They kept improving it up until publication, which means that the variant in there is even quicker than the one I mentioned earlier. Generating the 1.5 million game tests we did took 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Beyond that, the simulation data for both this simulation and our upcoming improved simulation also sits downloadable in the description. Not just the final rankings and ratings, because of course it's possible to just generate favorable data, but also every single individual game of the 15 million games ran during this simulation, which means, yes, there is a CSV file with every game that is, I shit you not, 1.4 gigabytes. But you can use that together with our player list to reverse engineer the rankings if you want to. Oh, and since I changed the names from just numbers to people I know, I made sure to include their actual player name as an ID next to their name. The real ID is something different, just to fuck you over and confuse you. At this point, in my eyes, the coffin of win-loss based Elo ranking systems has sunken through the floor into the center of the earth from the pure weight of all the nails that have been hammered into it. Not only is it anecdotally terrible, we now have the numbers of how bad it is. Glicko 2 doesn't help with this. During testing, when I implemented Glicko 2, I had a really hard time identifying the difference between it and traditional Elo. So instead, for our performance-enhanced system, let's stick to Elo. How's it going to work? Well, let me tell you. The primary debate going forward shouldn't be whether or not we implement a performance-based system. It's how we do that, and I'll get to that in the next segment. However, as we don't actually have a game on our hands, there's only really one way that we can implement this into our simulation. I'm going to implement, Sift is going to implement a system that uses our existing skill numbers, and it will work as such, obviously simplified for ease of understanding. Let's imagine you have this team of players, remembering of course that the numbers here represent whatever Valve ends up choosing to be a metric of good or bad performance. Currently, they represent skill the same way they did earlier, an imaginary number including all forms of contribution to a win. And let's say that this team has now won a game where each player would have received 100 points in accordance with Glicko 2 or Elo or what have you. We are going to take our median player here, it's Zero Anarchy, and use them as our pivot point.
Players above will have a positive alteration to their points, and players below will have a negative alteration to their points. We're going to treat Zero Anarchy as 100% of the normal points received, and their performance will also count as 100%. This means that we need to treat each player's performance as a part of 100%, which of course means it can go above or below 100, which is by design. Fang, for instance, sits at 3.5, which is 56% of 6.2. Mad Lee, meanwhile, is significantly further below at 6%. The players above will receive the same treatment. Sigum's 11.4 is 183% of 6.2, meanwhile Sanji's 8.9 is 143%, leaving us at 183 and 143. Now, obviously, we don't want a single game's mad performance to completely fuck up our rankings. What if the difference was way higher and Sigum would gain 600 points from a match that was calculated to give him 100? Well, that's why we're going to introduce a cap at 150% and 50%. This means that while Mad Lee and Sigum are extremely far apart, it still caps out at 50 and 150. But what do we do for a loss? Same players, same skills, but this time it's a negative. But if we use the exact same calculation, this time Sigum would be punished, because we'd be modifying the loss of Elo and making it worse. All we need to do is reverse the division, and we end up with appropriate numbers. This shows us not only that the system is quite versatile for both loss and win, while being simple to understand, it also shows us why we're gonna be capping the maximums, because Mad Lee would end up with negative 1,550 if we didn't cap it. So, if we use this system, what does that look like? We ran two simulations, one where the cap laid at 175% and 25%, and another where the cap laid at 150 and 50. I'll focus on the 150 and 50 here, but I will be showing occasionally in parentheses what the numbers were for the other simulation. One thing that's obvious from both the setup and the end result is the massive difference in rating delta. Back in standard Elo, the variance was so low because 90% of the players did the same up and down, which means most people stayed within a broad margin of error around 1,000 Elo. So the lowest available was Vondas with 473, and the highest was Backpack Brain with just under 1,500. Now, however, because it's more volatile in both directions, we actually had to add a floor to the ratings to make sure we didn't give any negative numbers. We put it at 25, so we're going to be going over 450 below where we went before. And we're ending higher too, with the highest rating sitting at 3,339. But the important part, how have things changed? The numbers we had before reflected an average rating deviation of 20,453, or specifically 13.6. Now, with their changes implemented and the skill affected, the average rating deviation is as low as 2,841. That is 1.8%. That is 750% more accurate right off the bat. A rating deviation of less than 2% in standard matchmaking with 30 million active players is 568,200. Now, while that doesn't sound like a lot, remember, the numbers we're competing against are 4 million players. 568,200 is a gigantic improvement on that fact. While the previous number was bigger than Croatia, our current estimation is the country of Malta, a tiny island south of Italy. Besides the rating deviation, let's get into specifics. Last time, Backpack Brain was our highest ranked player, and he was 2,257 ranks away from where he was supposed to be. This time, it's Sanji. Look at his Elo graph. Shit. Should have set the graph size back to normal. Anyway, his rank deviation is 7. Other side of the table, we're looking at the bottom ranked player. Last time, old Vondas was 1,312 ranks away from where he was supposed to be. This time, however, the bottom player is Big Guy for You. Now, initially, his rank deviation of 1,476 might sound high. It's higher than Vondas. That is until you remember that we put a floor on this ranking system set at 25 Elo. Big Guy here has hit it, and so has a ton of other people. In fact, he's sharing his rating with 1,490 people. That sounds really familiar. If we subtract 1,476 from 1,490, we get a ranking deviation of 14, which is, as you can tell by his skill, the true rank deviation. The reason I don't do this for every rank that has multiple people on the same rating is because it basically doesn't matter that much. We're looking at orders of magnitude and an ability of a system to separate players. If it can't do that successfully, the higher numbers are a reflection of that. In this instance, we've placed a floor, and just like the rank F on our Excel spreadsheet, we need to acknowledge that fact. Here, we can compensate for it by taking away the 1,490 from that player's ranking deviation to see the true number. If we were to compensate like this for every rank, we'd lower the ranking deviations for both the standard Elo and the performance-based Elo. But know that it would make my case even better because we have way more numbers between the bottom and top player in the performance-based Elo, which means, yeah, there's a lot more people that can be accurately ranked, and as a result, mathematically, our numbers would actually look even better. So let's look further at these numbers. Before, I was spoiled for choice with people that had a rank deviation of over 100,000. Now, the highest I can find doesn't even hit 20,000, which, might I remind you, is below the average we're seeing before. Yes, this system apparently doesn't even get as bad as the average was before. Meanwhile, players 5 or less ranks away, there's 277 of them. Last time, we had 30. This is way better in every way imaginable, and I haven't even done the numbers to calculate how much better it is in reality in some cases. Is it perfect? No. But is it measurably better than basing your ranking system entirely on win-loss? Yes. But at this point, the coffin is more nail than coffin, and I'm sitting here wondering, were you in any doubt at any point? Was anyone? I mean, seriously, of course factoring in skill would make the rating a better measure of skill, but I've just shown you how much better. It's a 750% improvement in accuracy. So I'm wondering, why in the fuck is this a debate? We all know that this was going to do better. Why are we talking about the whole system as if this wouldn't be better? Well, okay, we should be talking about the big problem, which is how do we do that? I could end my video here by simply walking off and leaving it with my point proved once and for all, but there's a thing I've been skirting around quite a bit throughout this whole video, which is the way that we would measure performance in the game. I've sort of just left that at the hands of Valve for the moment, but now that I'm after the simulations, I kinda want to put my hand on the scale and put a couple of ideas forwards. The randomness of the game and reality and people cannot be replicated perfectly in code, but ultimately, over enough games, it should do fine. On a base level, it should do better than singularly looking at wins and losses. So, how do we track in-game skills and performance? What are the methods we can use? Well, this should be the discussion we're having both as a community and internally at Valve. Whatever they do end up selecting, I have a couple ideas that I need to get off my chest before the video ends. Okay, this is going to sound stupid going in, but hear me out. It has a couple of benefits that are unique to this and the only way of doing this. First, it's a very simple and understandable system to begin with. It's something most people are aware of or have even interacted with, on top of which it builds on a system that is already in the game. Second, it's the best way I can think of to track performance in such a way that is both fully visible to the players at all times and avoids incentivizing baiting team play. With that established, a little history. Fantasy games are systems I didn't understand in my youth. I heard them being mentioned in sitcoms I liked, such as How I Met Your Mother, but I didn't understand it myself until I started using it in esports years later. So allow me to explain to you how fantasy sports work, assuming that you don't, or hey, just so we have the same foundation. Fantasy sports are a way for audience members who don't play a sport to use objective, non-team-based statistics and numbers to earn points by assembling a fictional team of players that are proxies of those real players in the actual league. For instance, you would assemble a team of players from a league of your chosen sport. From any teams or nationality, and those players would then get points based on their performance in the real-life games. Usually, you're given a budget and players have assigned values, so everyone doesn't just pick the top 5 best players in the world. Some systems, like NFL Fantasy, also force you to pick people from specific roles as well. So if you picked Lionel Messi to be your star player for a season, and he did really poorly, you'd not do too great with points, as the other players you picked were probably cheap and not star performers. For us, though, this is a system that determines player value through a points system. Sounds useful. Similarly, in Counter-Strike on HLTV, you can pick a roster of 5 players with $1 million in budget. You have to assign their roles and boosters. Each fantasy system is slightly different, and we're not going to go into stuff like roles or boosters or anything like that. We're interested in the objective reality of points that determine the value of a player, because this could, in theory, be a good starting point from which to derive our new algorithm. Fantasy sports points are generally derived from actions the player performs that help the team win and punishes actions that would be detrimental to the team. For instance, in football, scoring a goal or scoring an own goal give negative or positive points, inverse respectively. You don't lose points for scoring a goal. That would be insane. So, can this be applied to Counter-Strike? Yes, kind of. Because you see, CS has had the point system for a long time. It's on the right of your scoreboard, and the game will rank by it by default, which is why I always swap it to ADR, because it is, out of the available options, the best way to rank a player's contribution to the game. Or at least it was on the right of your scoreboard in CSGO. CS2 replaced it with the much more reasonable total damage, which is identical to ADR in ranking, because everyone has played the same amount of rounds. So let's look at the points given on the scoreboard and see if they have any obvious points of abuse. Things that give positive points are planting the bomb, defusing the bomb while enemies are alive, the bomb successfully explodes, getting a kill while the bomb is planted, and getting an assist. And things that take away points are killing yourself or killing a teammate. Okay, so there certainly aren't enough things, so let's make some modifications. First, let's get rid of the planting the bomb and instead give 1 point to the entire terrorist team if the bomb gets planted at all. Because if that happens, then someone did something right. Next, I'm gonna keep the killing yourself for a teammate, but I'm gonna make the team killing worse. That's a -3 points for you, brother. However, getting team killed is also gonna be a -2, so you really don't want to be either one in that transaction. And you definitely don't want the additional behavior score debuff that you'd also get as the team killer. The reason getting team killed has to be negative is to try to deter the pieces of shit who will try to sit in your molly and die just to get you banned. Even if it happens accidentally, both teammates should have done a better job. One person should have cleared the line of fire, and the other person should have checked their fire. Also, in the negative sector, I'm adding team flashing and getting team flashed as both being -1. Now, hopefully, CS has a way to count only the full white flash as opposed to the partial flash, because otherwise this shouldn't go in. Now, I'm also adding -1 for dying, because if you got 1 kill, then you traded yourself, and that's okay. You're still up a point, so that's good. I'm also going to expand on the getting a kill situation by making it more about what gun you have versus the enemy. A lot of situations I've been kind of frustrated that 1 kill counts as 1 kill, whether it's a Glock versus AK or an AK versus a Glock. So this will hopefully deter people who hunt for anti-eco kills, because real kills matter more anyway. If you get a kill while you have a better gun, such as a rifle versus SMG or pistols, you get only a +1. If you get a kill where both of you have matched level of guns, such as pistol versus pistol or rifle versus rifle, then it's +2 points, same as it is right now. And if you have a disadvantage and get a kill, you get +3 points. Frankly, for this, I also want to say that shotguns should count as rifles, but that's just me. I'd be fine with just using the actual categories given to us by Valve here of pistol, mid, and rifles. And of course, we're going to be counting assists in terms of both flashes and damage. Speaking of flashes, I want to add one more thing. Successful flash. Now, this wouldn't be 1 point per player flashed, however much that would boost my personal score. It is 1 point for each successful flash, i.e. each flash that actually blinded 1 or more enemies. I get that this would reward a full team flash and a single pop flash the same, but it needs to be this way so we can actually give a reward to players who use flashes tactically and not exclusively as a tool to get kills. And rewarding for all flashes of an enemy is just too much. I realize it sounds hypocritical with the kills argument I made earlier, but I just think they're very different scenarios, and I hope you can see that. So, with my points list, here's what we're looking at. Finally, let's add 2 more negatives and a final positive, dying untradeable and not attempting a trade. Now, these I'm only adding at the end, at the bottom, and in italics for a reason. These would require such specific tracking and knowledge of the situation, you'd almost need an AI to know whether it was actually a bad play or not. Lurkers and side anchors provide a crucial role in a lot of plays and frequently die untraded. Additionally, in a post-plant situation, let's say it's B-side to Mirage and both of you are hiding bench, it might be smart to actually let one of you die so they think the area is clear, and the other player not immediately peek for a trade to set up a better situation later on. So I'm going to leave these as suggestions that I wouldn't implement unless we have some form of AI or algorithm aware of the context and appropriate actions in the game. There's a lot of other stuff that could be tracked if we had that advanced of an AI, potentially tracking when comms are used and if the player calls out stuff like seeing smokes, flashes, or enemy players and causing rotations. But I think tradable deaths are at least feasible to track in some way as opposed to that other nonsense. The last positive is successful damaged utility, which will give a +1. This is basically just any HE or Molotov that deals assist levels of damage, i.e. above the threshold for an assist. Yes, this will reward 500 damage Molotovs the same as 30 damage Molotovs for the Molotov. It's got to be this way, otherwise it becomes a little too powerful. Now we have our points, let's assign some rules. These cannot stack in individual events. So, for instance, if you get team flashed, then team killed at the same time, that should just count as getting the individual team kill. If, of course, your teammate flashed an enemy that you killed, both of you get the points for the kill and the flash respectively, same as if someone else team flashed you and then someone else team killed you. The only thing that can stack is kills. If you get a collateral or an HE/Molotov takes out multiple people at the same time, the kills will always count individually, and it's the only thing that will. Note that I did put a lot of care into giving a lot of points for utility and teamwork stuff out there, so looking at the list, yes, while I reward kills more, there's only one real problem with the list, at least that I can see immediately, that would need a little bit of help for real-world implementation. Just Scout Deagle morons. These people will, in this system, play Deagle only or Deagle Scout only. So I'm going to add another score metric that I'm not smart enough to fully articulate the exact mathematics of, but I know that it's possible. So anyway, if the majority of a team is buying full rifles, -1 point for anyone who can afford to buy full rifles and utility, but chooses not to. The edge case for this that would need to get caught somehow is if the enemy team is eco or force buy, the player might have a read and actively buy a MAC-10 or MP9 to money farm. If the enemy team is full buying and the player thinks that they're ecoing and buys a MAC-10 and it's wrong, that is punishable because their math is bad and they made a mistake. Thankfully, eco and force on the enemy are two things that should be possible to find out because of the money and utility value that's being tracked already. More important than that, though, I envision all of these points being tracked away from the player's eyes somewhere on the server, or maybe even on a separate API entirely hooked onto the server, and preferably only shown once the game is actually complete. Headshot percentage and ADR is fun to track during the game, but frankly, anything that could lead to a player gaining info from the scoreboard should probably not be visible until the end of the game. You could even do what Scope GG does and track the individual successful points and the failed points, and then add them into CSTV as a list of timestamps that you can see exactly what you did wrong or right. I think this system is good and worthy of testing full scale on either a cluster of servers on FaceIT or a cluster of players in CS. Now, let's look at another alternative, probably the one everyone thinks we should do. HLTV 2.0 rating has been the gold standard for player performance for a long time. It remains on every broadcast as the thing everyone uses as a primary performance metric for players in professional matches. So naturally, we slot that in, right? Well, no. See, HLTV 1.0 was introduced in the year of our Lord 2010 and was based on comparing the player's average stats of kills per round, survived rounds per round, and value based on multi-kill rounds, which is of course heavily favoring individuals who frag heavily, and we don't want that at all. Rewarding those who frag out will inevitably cause an uptick in baiters, so we can't have people playing for KD. It was a messy stat that wasn't all that complex or interesting, so it needed to be paired with a bunch of other stats, and frankly, it was designed for 1.6, which in a couple years after that didn't even exist. So in 2017, they announced HLTV 2.0. And yeah, that means that right now, HLTV 2.0 is as old as 1.0 was when they came up with the updated version. Not to mention, 2.0 was also made for a version of Counter-Strike that doesn't exist anymore. But more importantly, the goal of this was to add on to the original 1.0 additional metrics that improve the number for individuals who contribute to the team win, but don't do so in raw kills, incorporating data like damage dealt, opening kills, clutch wins, trades, and more, whatever that means. It even splits the rating apart from T and CT rather than taking the match as a whole as if T and CT are exactly the same. This gave us a lot more insight into a player's impact on the game, but it's still heavily influenced by those who frag out. Support players were still underutilized, and there also isn't really any metric for a player playing above their standard rating.
Okay, so unfortunately, while I was editing this video, I got scooped once again after calling HLTV 2.0 not all that good. HLTV introduced HLTV attributes in August of this year, so egg on my face. It's still not a single rating, but taken as an average, those numbers could be used to track how good you are at the game quite accurately. Anyway, what follows is still technically true if you ignore that attributes exist now.
By 2020, people viewed HLTV as, while good, they wanted a more valuable system. So in 2021, in comes Leadify. Leadify is an excellent platform that I recommend anyone who plays CS sign up to right now next to Scope GG. It's by far and away the best site for metrics on your performance in every single aspect of the game, and the fact that it gives far better metrics than the game already did is kind of sad. CSGO 360 was a disappointment, and CS2 360 doesn't exist yet. Unlike Scope GG, however, Leadify came up with their own Leadify rating, a rating system that not only takes into account kills, damage, utility, aim, and clutches, but also considers the sequence of kills and how key events interact with win probability. This rating doesn't just award one kill equally, it looks at the context of the kill and looks at the contributions to the outcome of said kill, looking at who did what amount of damage to the target to finish the kill, if there was a flash involved, or even if a teammate acted as a distraction for said kill. This is a massive component that helps in giving us a good idea of who is doing what and helping in what way. And one thing Leadify rewards is actually saving your guns, doing additional calculations and rewarding the difference in win probability between saving and not saving. Leadify Leadify is far more complex than HLTV 2.0, but also far more accurate to a player's performance. But I'd still pick and choose which one gives me the higher number to stroke my ego, of course. The big problem I have right now is that I don't really have a scale test of this. I have both the Leadify and Fantasy Sports things sitting in front of me, and I'm thinking, there's no way for me to test this properly because, well, I'm not running real simulations with bots, and if I was to run real simulations with bots, I'd have to run 15 million games off of my tiny PC. I can't do that, but I know who can. FaceIT.
Hang on, let me just quickly move house. Maniac did what? Okay. Before I move on, I just want to thank you for watching this all the way through. This video was a lot of work during a really difficult time in my life. If you want to support my work further, I have a Patreon linked in the description.
There I'll post some behind-the-scenes content and updates on future videos.
So, thank you. The initial reaction to FaceIT's update was negative. A lot of people brought up RWS and ESEA, a broadly flawed system that primarily rewarded damage done to the enemy as the only component of a round win. The general consensus seemed to be that this would reward bad team play. People immediately assumed that their contributions to a round win, other than KD, would be forgotten, most likely because of their interaction with RWS from ESA or similar systems in other games. One commenter did list out the numerous things people should be aware of before reacting overly negative to the system, but of course it got minimal replies because people want to be angry about it. In general, the response can be summed up as a fear of a bad system that would reward people baiting or playing for KD rather than a system that rewards actual good team play, or a belief that it's impossible or really difficult to judge a player's performance in a game. My problem with this is that I obviously disagree. I just gave you two options that I think are a pretty good starting point for ranking based on performance, but more importantly than that, this is a video game. At every single moment of the game, the position, velocity, utility, and actions of every single player in the game is being tracked. Where they're looking, what they're holding, where they're going, what positions they're holding, and every position they've held and will hold during the entire game when you're looking at it after the fact. You can track your movement on a heat map if you wanted to. Everything is being tracked. In some cases, even your voice chat can be tracked. So I have no doubt that there is some combination of metrics and numbers that can accurately reflect a player's performance in the game, especially when that's true for 90% of regular sports. And in that instance, you cannot see the game exactly from that player's perspective or track every action they did in that game in ones and zeros. There must be a set of data points that can declare the value of a player's contribution to the game without valuing exclusively kills deaths. But as FaceIT won't give me their data, no matter how much I kiss FaceIT Mikey right on the mouth, all I can do is track the public's opinion. So I whipped up a survey and posted it on r/Global Offensive. And after a full 24 hours, it was filled with 23 responses. Out of those 23, 9 of them claimed to be FaceIT level 10 before and after the update, rendering their opinion null and void because the update doesn't apply to them. One of them was also legitimately a top 100 in Oceania, and as a result would definitely not see anything from the update at all on their end. Out of the remaining 13, only 4 of them actually gave their FaceIT name, allowing me to verify their rank. This meant I had 4 high-quality responses and 9 dubious ones. Now, here's my dilemma. I said in my original post on Reddit that I would be posting these results of the survey on Reddit after the video was done, and I guess I'm posting this video there, so that's a result. But I kinda don't want to tell you what the high-quality verifiable responses said, nor what the non-verifiable responders said, other than that 2 separate responses were entirely I don't care, and as a result I'm not including those in the final numbers. The reason I don't want to tell you is because of this video. Please, if you've played on FaceIT since the update, the survey is the top link in the description, and I will be doing a follow-up with your response, if there is enough of them, and perhaps some feedback on this video as well. Later on, as soon as I have enough to go on, I'll be starting to make that as well. And that's it. I think between the 2 simulations I did, it's clear that there's a problem with relying solely on win-based Elo systems, due to the fact that the vast majority of your chance to win in team-based games is dictated by random luck of the draw of both your enemies and your teammates. Now, you can control your teammates to some extent if you try to queue only with friends, but how often do you actually manage to queue with a full 5 that you know you can reliably play well with? And how often do you get enemies that are appropriate to your own level? And if you want to control who you play with, you're going to lower your amount of games played as well, which will make it even longer to climb Ultimately, if a system is based entirely on wins and losses, the simulations I've showcased here tell us clearly that just mathematically, a system that takes into account some form of performance will be more accurate than a system that doesn't. We can complain about teamwork not being counted or KD being overvalued, but in truth, no matter what, this is a game where the primary way to win a round is to kill all 5 enemies on the other team. No matter what, performance will be dictated, probably mostly by an individual's ability to kill and their tenacity to survive. It is up to the creator of whatever performance metric ends up being the standard to ultimately decide how to mitigate the negatives of that reality, how we avoid rewarding those who bait or lone wolf. What I hope more than anything is that this video has made it a lot harder to simply look away and say that what we have currently is just fine. Because it isn't. It's like 10 times worse than the alternative I proposed in this video. Anyway, thank you for watching. Goodbye.